Hi, everybody. Ed Bixby here from the Global Green Burial Alliance, and this is Spotlight Now. Today, I'm with Steve Pomerantz of Gentle Water Cremation. Steve Pomerantz is the owner of Gentle Water Cremation in West Palm Beach, Florida. Steve holds a bachelor's degree in philosophy from Northwestern University and has worked in management consulting, film finance, and tech startups. So welcome, Steve.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So why don't we get started by learning a little bit more about how Gentle Water came to be and what inspired its creation?
So, like you said, I was a tech entrepreneur and I was kind of looking for the next thing that I wanted to do. And a mutual friend introduced me to my now business partner, Tina, who he's like, I have this friend. She's got this weird idea, and I think you'd make a good team. She's also kind of brilliant. So I met Tina. She told me about water cremation, and I had been volunteering for about 10 years at Comfort Zone Camp, which is a bereavement camp for kids who've lost parents and siblings. Um, and so when she told me about water cremation, I thought back to the camp and hearing kids say, "Boy, I didn't like that mom was burned." Um, and so it just struck me that water cremation could help families grieve better. Now, at the time, uh, so Tina and I, we researched it together, and it started to just feel right and check the boxes. We called around to the other places in the country that had water cremation, talked to them, heard how it was going, heard how people were responding. Um, and and we decided, okay, this makes a lot of sense. And I actually live in Los Angeles. Our business is in Florida. I grew up in Florida. Um, Initially, we were going to do this here in Los Angeles. Um, and we ran into so much red tape trying to get it set up that we decided, you know what, let's just move it to Florida. And Florida made a lot of sense for a couple reasons. But, the first water cremation operation in the country, the first retail or for-profit water cremation operation in the country was at Anderson McQueen Funeral Home and Cemetery in Florida. But that was around 2010, 2011, 2012. Well, they got bought by foundation partners. Foundation partners got rid of the machine. So Florida was ready to receive a water cremation operation, but no one was doing it there. So it just kind of made a lot of sense, and the process went a little bit better than it would have here in California. And along the way, Tina and I wound up partnering with Dean Fisher, who was the head of organ donation at the Mayo Clinic and at UCLA. And he's kind of one of the godfathers of water cremation and helped develop the technology. Initially, he was gonna start up his own water cremation operation, and he just sort of started coaching us. Then he became a friend, and then we all sat down and said, "Why are we going to compete against each other? We like each other so much. Let's just do it together." So that's kind of how we formed this, and um, we finally, it took a couple years to find the right location and to move everything to Florida, but we finally got opened January of 2024. Um, and we've served about 70 families so far. We've also started working with some trade partners, some other funeral homes. So, if you want a direct water cremation, you come to us. But if you want to work with the family funeral home, you can go to them, and we'll work with them to, we're still the only ones doing water cremation in Florida. But there are other places you can go if you want that full service experience.
Well, and Steve, being it's a case of being in the right place at the right time. As we all know, the path of least resistance, California, other places like that will certainly follow. So I'm glad to hear that you're able to serve the great state of Florida. And I'm sure someday, I know Dean. I've met him several times. He's very a smart guy. I mean, if anyone would be your partner, he would be the best one that you could imagine to have.
Yeah.
Someone who had their hand in the creation of the process itself, really. So, uh, explain to our viewers. So this is the interesting thing. People they know about flame-based cremation. They may have heard about aquamation, but explain to the viewers a little bit about what acclimation is and what your process looks like and how long does it take? What is it? So if someone were to come to you, what should they expect?
Yeah, and by the way, we try and stick to the term water cremation. Aquamation is actually one manufacturer of the machines that do
Oh,
water cremation, and so they've branded it Aquamation, but we think they're a great company. We actually have Resumations machine, a different company. But we think it's just simpler for people out there to understand water cremation because at least you kind of start to get what water cremation is when you hear it. When I encounter someone who's never heard of it before, I say it's like flame cremation that you know, but we use water instead of flames. Then, of course, they get a puzzled look and they're like, okay, so how does that work? Well, it's a big metal chamber that fills with water and a little bit of alkali, which I'll talk about in a second. It gently circulates around the body for 4 to 6 hours. And at the end, you're left with the same bones that you get at the end of a flame cremation. Um, and so what we're doing is kind of speeding up the decomposition process that would happen in the ground. And actually, alkali it's a chemical. So in the Earth's crust, you've got 2.5% potassium. Well, we use 5% potassium, which is an alkali, and 95% water. So we're using the same catalyst that speeds up decomposition in the Earth's crust. So it really is a very natural process. Now at the end, so at this point in the explanation, people will generally look at me and be like, wait, but with a flame cremation, you get ashes. What do I get with water cremation? So there's a common misconception that at the end of a flame cremation, you've already got this finely ground ash. That's not the case. You actually have bones. So we use the same machine that they use in a flame cremation to process the bones into cremated remains. And we can return the same cremated remains in an urn that you would get in a flame cremation with a couple key differences. With water cremation, you get about 20% more just because it's a slower, more contained process, so there's less loss. And it's a stainless steel container. There's not anywhere that the extra material can go. It's also pure white. So, when people in the funeral profession, when we give them tours and we show them what cremated remains from water cremation look like, the word they use is beautiful, which isn't really a term that you typically think about associated with cremation and cremated remains. But when you compare it to the alternative, the product that you get through us really is pretty beautiful. And you can do all the same things that you would do with the traditional cremation. You can scatter at sea, you can have parting stones made, and you can have it returned in an urn.
And I appreciate, you pointing out the difference in the name, Steve, when you say water cremation, aquamation. It's like terramation or natural organic reduction or green
Yeah.
burial. It's interesting how, certain processes acquire, a name just by the talk that, people have about it. So no, thanks for bringing that up. And concerning water cremation, I think from an environmental standpoint, could you explain to the viewers a little bit about what the difference might be, as far as the carbon footprint is concerned with the process?
Yeah. So, there are a number of different studies you can find, and they generally all come to the conclusion that water cremation is about a 90% less carbon footprint than flame cremation. And as I know, you're probably out there telling everybody green burial is a huge step up people aren't aware of all of the environmental impacts of a traditional burial. So it's even more of a carbon footprint for a traditional burial. And the difference is we don't expose the body to fossil fuels. There's no flame. We still do have to heat the water and pressurize the water, or pressurize the container. So there is some expenditure, some carbon footprint, but it's way, way less. one calculation I saw was that it's the equivalent of eliminating a back and forth cross-country car trip. People also wonder about, well, aren't you going through a lot of water? The amount of water we use is about what the average American family goes through in a day. So it's not, it's not really as big a concern as people think, though. That maybe is one of the advantages in having moved from California to Florida, where water is a little bit more plentiful.
No, absolutely. And that's really an interesting, I mean, 90%, that's a huge number, you know. I mean, that in itself should, you know, it's certainly a gentler return, no doubt. You know, when you think of flame-based, it seems so much harsher than this alternative, at least when it comes to the gentleness of the water process. And, you know, with that being said, what do you find draws your customers to the process? What have they said when they've come to you? What drew them to you?
So when I first heard about water cremation, I thought, okay, well, maybe this is just an environmental thing, which I care a lot about. But that wasn't enough to say, okay, I want to go build this business and I think there's a need for this. So in calling around to all the other funeral homes in the country that were offering it at the time, I started to see a pattern that they would say people come in, maybe they don't even know about water cremation, and they come in, we want a cremation. They say, oh, would you like traditional cremation, or would you like to hear about the new water cremation or flameless cremation or aquamation, or however they're presenting it? Um, and 60 to 80% of the time, people wound up choosing it primarily because they thought it was a more gentle treatment of the body. The environmental thing, a lot of people love, but it's kind of an afterthought for most of the families we serve. And that started to tell me that it had a much broader appeal. And it also reminded me of the kids at camp saying, I didn't like that mom was burned. And so it just sort of all started to click and make sense.
Yeah, and you bring up a very good point. You know, it's very similar to natural burial. It's, you know, very few of my customers, certainly they're, you know, they believe in the environment, but it really comes down to, you know, that celebration, the way you want to return, you know, back to the earth, or, you know, so I can appreciate that. I totally understand what you mean. And, you know, as we know, as the viewers know, you know, Florida, you know, the snowbirds, people love to retire to Florida. So, you know, there's a lot of people who, you know, the natural process of life will need end of life services, most certainly. And with that being said, what currently is the most popular disposition method in Florida? And have you seen a growing demand for the water cremation or other eco-friendly alternatives in the state of Florida?
Flame cremation is the most popular method of disposition in Florida, by a lot. And Florida, you know, like everywhere else, running out of real estate, burial is getting more and more expensive, and people are down there living on retirement budgets. So, that's not everyone, but for a large percent of the population, cremation is the way to go. Now, our big challenge has been getting the word out about water cremation, because when people hear about it, most of the time they say, oh, wow, that sounds great. And especially in Florida, where you have so many people who spend so much of their time around the water, whether they're boaters or swimmers or fishermen, or if they've served in the Navy and been on a ship. There are just a lot of reasons that people have an affinity for water. There are also religious reasons that people would choose water cremation. I'm Jewish. If you're Jewish, there's also, first you think to the Holocaust and you think about the ovens that were used there. And so flame is sort of not a little distasteful for that reason. And there's also a post-death ritual involving washing the body. Similarly with, there's baptism in Christianity. In Hinduism, there's ritual bathing in the Ganges River. So there are just a whole lot of reasons that people are gravitating toward it. Of course, in a big crowd of people, there will be someone who will raise their hand and say, oh, I think that's a little gross. And, it's not going to be for everyone, but 40 years ago, people thought cremation was gross. And it's really just kind of if you learn enough about any method of disposition, you're going to find things that are distasteful about it. So there's so much in the story you tell about it and how you choose to understand it. Um, but we also think green burial and natural organic reduction are fantastic. We want people to know what their options are and to know that you don't just have to be burned or buried in a concrete vault, that there are alternatives.
Well, that's what it's all about. And that's what, the education aspect, like you said, that's really what's most important, because most people don't have these end of life conversations until it's too late. So to be informed and well informed prior to that day is really important. And like you said, I mean, it comes down to freedom of choice. That's what makes America great. I mean, you should respect everyone's choices, but there are certain ways that certainly are more beneficial to the environment and to the future of the world. Uh, so, you had said something, and you had mentioned that cremation was the most popular disposition at the moment in Florida, and a lot of it has to do with retirement incomes and things like that. But what is what is the cost difference, or what does a water cremation versus a flame-based cremation look like?
So in Florida, I think it's hard to find the right average number because you hear a lot of different ones quoted. But if you walked into a typical funeral home in Florida and just wanted kind of a direct water cremation, you'd be looking at somewhere north of $2,000. There are places you can go for a very simple direct cremation, that you could find it under $1,000. Maybe once you get out the door, it'd be a little bit more than that. But we've priced it at just under $3,000 for a direct water cremation. And we wanted it to be, competitive and within reachable for
Right.
people who were otherwise considering flame cremation. I know that in some states, some providers have gone as high as $4, $5, $6,000 for the equivalent of what we do. And that might be right for their market. Our goal is Florida's a big place. We want to get the word out. We'd rather be able to serve more families and have them all be very happy than serve fewer and charge them more.
No, absolutely. I agree with that philosophy. I mean, I follow the same philosophy. And for the viewers, like you said, you can get a direct cremation in some places as little as $1,000. Your price is very fair. I mean, natural burials plots typically start around $2,500 to $3,000. So a lot of what we do kind of is in the same realm, the same world. So having that ability to serve everyone is important. I appreciate that. Commend you guys for that. I think that's really, really a great thing that you're doing. And this brings me to the best part of the, at least for me, of the interview is, I always like to know what your hopes and dreams are. So where would you like to hope, and where would you hope to see Gentle Water cremation uh, in 5 to 10 years? What would be the perfect scenario for you?
I think having everybody in Florida know that water cremation is an option. And who knows, maybe beyond Florida, but for now, we are just focused on Florida. Um,
Well,
but we serve the whole state. We're located in West Palm Beach, but we've that's another place where we've kind of cut out where a lot of funeral homes upcharge for removals for if you need to have your person like from far away. Um, we don't make a profit when we bring somebody in from other parts of the state. So we get a lot of our customer base already from Orlando, Gainesville, Tampa, Jacksonville, farther out parts of the state. So to answer your question, yeah, we want everybody to know that this is an option and to have the misconceptions about it be understood. There are some. I saw a YouTube video where somebody said that we were feeding people in the water supply to other people. Um, so I think getting a fair shake is important. And I would like to see a responsible public conversation about what we do. And word travels fast. So I do think it's the kind of thing that once it catches on, that snowball effect will take place and people are going to know about it.
No, you're 100% correct. And transparency is key. Transparency of process. Once people, are educated, like you said, they can make their decisions based upon that. So, we here at the Global Green Burial Alliance appreciate what you do, Steve. Anyone here that's down in the West Palm Beach area, know that Gentle Water Cremation is there, and they serve the whole state of Florida, which is great. So thanks for joining us today, Steve. And viewers, you can learn more by visiting gentlewater.com. And yeah, keep us posted, Steve, and keep up the good work.
Thank you. And by the way, if you're in town, you, Ed, or anybody who's watching, if you want to come for a tour of our location, it's very different than a typical crematory. It's really kind of feels more like a research university setting. So we love giving tours. We love answering questions. Give us a call, shoot us an email, visit us online. So thank you for having me, Ed.
You're very welcome. All right, everyone. Ed Bixby here with the Global Green Burial Alliance, and see you at the next Spotlight Now.